And I'm glad you're here, and welcome to those of you who are joining online. I'm grateful for the technology that makes it possible for us to do this. And no matter who you are or where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. So let's begin in silence. If it helps to close your eyes, you can do that. This is our way of manifesting our intention, and today's class is a lot about intention, as will be next week's, to be aware that we live in the heart of sacred mystery and that this mystery seeks to find expression through who we are and through how we live, how we interact with each other and with others. So, as I say, if it helps to close your eyes, you can do that. May grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be at our ends and at our departing. And may the power of new life work on all that we do and all that we are. And may we be increasingly open to growing into the kind of people that we are designed to be. Amen. So last week I lit a candle here, and afterwards somebody said to me that they thought I was about to do a magic trick. And that they were disappointed that I didn't. And you know, I get conflicted about doing magic in here because sometimes it doesn't fit. I wonder if it's appropriate. But what I thought I would do today is maybe teach you something that we magicians have to learn to do to practice two things: manipulation and misdirection. They are both keys in doing magic. So I'm going to show you an exercise that I learned as part of becoming part of their International Brotherhood of Magicians. And I invite you to join me in doing this exercise. You hold your hands out like this with your thumbs up. Now, not too far in front of you or you'll jab the person in front of you. Everybody do it. Hold your hands out with your thumbs up like you're about to applaud. Now turn your thumbs down like this. Cross your right hand over your left and interlace your fingers. Wiggle both of your little fingers. Okay? Now, just your right. Now this is hard because your mind gets confused, but just your right, okay? Now watch me and do this. And when you can do that, then you can do magic. Okay, next week. So before I say anything today, I want to say something about what I'm going to say. So as you know, I have been using a roadmap of one of the narratives we have of the Jesus story. And one of my goals in that is that we grow in spiritual and religious literacy, that we grow, in our knowledge about Jesus, about his teachings, and about how they are relevant for our lives. And we've reached a place in this journey where we are about to encounter the most difficult teaching in the entire Jesus database of teachings. And consequently, it's been a challenge to write about, to teach about. Pardon me. As a matter of fact, we're going to camp out on this teaching for a little while. So one of the things that I would like to be clear about is that I do not have, nor does Jesus have, something to inject into you. There is an artesian well of fresh, clear, life-giving water already within us. We do, however, have to do the work that allows this water to come forth and then move us and that teaching into the world. So if you are anything like me, and pray that you aren't, you're probably somewhere between being dismayed and hopeless about the state of our country. And what I want to say is that the remedy for what ails us, pardon me, is not outside of ourselves. So there is a reason and a need for us, for others, for our country, for our globe, for us to learn to live hopefully. Now, here's one of the hard parts. And don't blame me for this. Blame the sources of our teaching, like in this case, Jesus. The root of every fear, problem, loss of hope that we have, that our world experiences, lies in the neglect of people doing their inner work. Now, I'm not going to spend almost any time today talking about that, because it's one of the things that people make fun of me about, having a daily spiritual practice. However, I want you to be aware that it is the undertone of the entire teaching for today, this inner work. So last week I summarized the entire theology of the Wayless Way with these words. The Wayless Way is about claiming kinship with Jesus and seeking the same kind of relationship he had with the sacred, and doing that with the trust that this will not leave us unchanged. I can summarize that even further. You cannot grow spiritually and remain the same. Now, if you understand that, that understanding is knowledge. If you embrace this in practice, then that is wisdom. And there is a great difference between knowledge and wisdom. So Jesus was a wisdom teacher, not a knowledge teacher. He was also Jewish. And he was a mystical teacher in the prophetic tradition of that Jewish religion. Now, I say these things because it's easy for us to fall into the illusion that Jesus was a Christian speaking to Christians. But that's not so. So one of the goals that Jesus had, it was not the only one to be sure, was to restore wisdom-based living into the people he taught. Now, one of the problems that a spiritual teacher in our time has is how to do this, because our culture doesn't support it. What our culture pushes us at every turn is that we should acquire satisfaction in the various searches we have for pleasure and love and security, and energy spent for and attempting to acquire satisfaction in these arenas is just greater in our culture than anybody seeking for spiritual illumination. However, and we're going to encounter that theological word a lot today, it is only in finding a spiritual solution for life's dilemmas that we will find what we are looking for. That I did not make up either. That comes from Carl Jung. Now, all is clear so far? Knowledge, wisdom, inner work, putting all that together like this. Now, I'm not saying that knowledge and information are not important. They are. Much of today's time is about that. When I sent out the preview for the class, I don't know how many people read that or not, but I had given the title for today's talk, Spiritual Improvisations. And I was trying to seek a way to explain what I think Jesus meant in this very difficult teaching that we are up to for today. So as I was working on this talk and trying to figure out how to do this, I remembered an interview I heard on NPR years ago where this interviewer was interviewing this jazz musician. And he asked this jazz musician, how often do you plan ahead of time how you're going to work improvisation into your music? And the jazz musician said, never. And the reporter said, wow, that's really impressive. I have been a musician for 20 years, and I still cannot improvise. How do I learn to do this? And the musician said, practice. So I've changed the title from spiritual improvisation to custodians of consciousness. And you'll see why as we go on. Now we have to know how to do spiritual improvisation to get here. But this is the goal. We are custodians of consciousness in our culture. Now, being able to improvise on a musical instrument is not something you just fall into. It takes years of practice. And perhaps even more, it takes desire. So in spiritual lingo, the word for desire is intention. This shows up particularly in Eastern religions, the word intention. So if the musician does not do the practice and does not have the intention, that person will never perform improvisational music. Now I warned you, this is hard today. Here is the way Eugene Peterson renders the passage that we are up to in Jesus' teaching. Don't be surprised for a minute that I have come to demolish the scriptures, either God's law or the prophets. I'm not here to demolish, but to complete. I'm going to put it all together, pull it all together in a vast panorama. God's law is more real and lasting than the stars in the sky and the ground at the feet. Long after the stars burn out and earth wears out, God's law will be alive and working. Trivialize the smallest item in God's law, and you will only have trivialized yourself. But take it seriously. Show the way for others. and you will find honor in the kingdom. Unless you do better than the Pharisees in matters of right living, you won't know a thing about entering the kingdom. Now here's the stressor in this teaching. Unless you do better than the Pharisees, you're not going to make it. And then comes the list. We didn't read them today. Of all the things that Jesus says we have to be better at doing. Now, in theology and biblical studies, we call these the transformative initiatives of Jesus. And when they come up in the lectionary, every preacher in a tradition like the one that we're in hates these things. I'm serious. Because there's no easy way to preach these. Most of you have heard of them. They begin with Jesus saying, "You have heard it said, but I say unto you." You familiar with that formula? You have heard it said that you are not to commit adultery, but I say to you, don't even look lustfully at someone. Here's the hard one. You've heard that you are to divorce legally. I'm telling you, don't divorce at all. Ouch. Don't say anything you don't mean. And love everybody, especially your enemies. And on it goes. Now, to pile confusion onto this is hard. Jesus then goes about breaking the law. Improvisational spirituality. So, in an effort to continue to contribute to religious literacy, I want to introduce you to a guy. You've never heard of him, most of you. His name is Rudolf Otto. He died the year I was born. He doesn't look very happy, does he? He was a German Lutheran. And he wrote perhaps one of the most important books in theology that has ever been written. The book is called The Idea of the Holy. The subtitle of this book is An Inquiry into the Non-Rational Factor in the Idea of the Divine and its Relation to the Rational. Now, I told you this was hard. This is not pablum. This is real stuff. We're going to deal with this stuff later. Now, to explain what he meant by this sentence, he used the word numinous. I bet you didn't use that word yet today. And by that word, what he meant was that we have to have a profound emotional experience at the heart of our spiritual practice. Now, the word numinous found its way into the English language somewhere in the mid-1700s. It means spiritual. It means holy. It means divine. But like most of these words, it can't be said. Because the root of the word, which comes from Sanskrit and then into Latin, means this. That's what you have in Eastern religions. It's an assent to someone or something. It's respect. It's intention. It's this, the idea of the numinous. So in this book, Rudolf Otto explains a way of understanding non-duality, which, if we can grasp, I think will help us on our journey in learning how to spiritually improvise so that we can become custodians of consciousness. Okay? Again, to improvise, the musician has to practice and have intention. There's no way to get to be able to improvise without those two things. Can't read about it. I mean, you can't learn to swim by reading a book. You have to get in the water, right? Okay. So, knowledge and information are not the same as wisdom and understanding. Wisdom and understanding come when we experience duality, and we open ourselves to the non-dual when we experience the numinous. That's the steps. So, for example, it's one thing to say that both conservatives and liberals have truth on their side, right? It's another thing to try to hold those two positions at the same time. Try it. If you're liberal, try holding a conservative position. Or if you're conservative, try holding a liberal position. It's hard. If you do this, you will suffer. For one thing, whether you're liberal or conservative, if you hold them both together, you will give up the comfort of security. You don't know. We think we do. Jim Baxton one time told a story in one of his sermons. And the story was that in this European community, small community, there was a couple who'd been married for many years, and they were in such a quarrel, they went to see the rabbi. So they went into the rabbi's study. And the man, who didn't want to be there in the first place, like most guys, don't want to go to counseling, he poured out his story about what a wench his wife was. How she was nothing like the young girl that he had married. She had turned into a nag. She was never satisfied with anything. She complained all the time, never listened to him, never did his bidding. And when he finished the story, the rabbi looked at him and said, "You're right." To which the wife just tore into both of them and said, "You have no idea what it's like to live with this guy. He does not listen to me. He was kind when we courted, but is not now. He's rude and inconsiderate." Goes on and on and on. He's withholding. He's devious. And at the end of her spewing all this out, the rabbi said to her, "You're right." So they left in a huff, no better off than when they came. And the rabbi came out of his study. His wife confronted him. And she said, "I could hear everything that was going on in that room." And you listened to the husband and said, "He's right." You listened to the wife and said, "She's right." They both can't be right. And the rabbi said, "You're right." One of the things that affects our becoming good at spiritual improvisation is the distractions that we have in our culture. Now, we're not living in Gaza. We're not living in the Ukraine, where the reality of survival is top. We don't have that to deal with. But such suffering can drive people to the depths of the sacred. So what distracts us is the triviality of our technology. Excuse me. I have a cartoon I sent to Tim that this man and woman are at the restaurant. His phone is like this. He said, I am paying attention to you. My phone's face down. Studies show it needs to be in your purse or your pocket. The phone pings. We pick it up. Might be somebody. The other day there was a young person who came to a funeral here, and he had not been in this church before, and he asked one of the pastors, what's the Wi-Fi password here? And the pastor was kind of indignant and says, have some respect for the deceased. And the young person said, is that all little letters? That didn't happen. So if we allow the concerns of the ego rather than the self to distract us by superficial negative preoccupations, we're going to risk being at their dictates rather than serving the self. Now, it used to be that knowledge and information were a way to bliss in culture. But the wisdom dimension of intelligence has been largely put aside in Western culture. Even though knowledge and information can lead to discovery of reality and meaning, our culture simply doesn't train us to do this. I'm going to say more about that in a minute, but I think that public school teachers ought to be paid as much as doctors. And that they deserve the time and respect to train young people because they're our future. Now you're going to hear what a problem what we've done in public education has become for us in this custodian of consciousness thing. I hope that Ordinary Life contributes not only our growing capacity to be awake, but developing this wisdom-based intelligence that I'm talking about, both individually and collectively. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that our human future depends on this. We live in a culture where there is a widespread disregard for the sacred. That's in human relationships and economic transactions. In fact, in virtually every discipline in human life. And that's the reason that everything around us is collapsing. It's not minor, this absence of the sacred. What Rudolf Otto called the idea of the holy, being absent in our culture, is not a minor thing. So Jesus teaches that the more there is a sense of the absence rather than the presence of the sacred, individuals will face in deteriorating conditions of human dignity and general well-being. So everyday life becomes an experience of isolation. How are you different from me? Do you agree with me? And of alienations. We mistrust each other. So human intimacy is replaced by technological connections. And the development of human life is disregarded. So profits are made with no consideration for human well-being. Entertainment numbs us rather than inspires us. Government does not protect, but controls through power and intimidation. That's grown big in our culture. It is so tempting for me not to dip into what's going on in American culture right now to illustrate these points. I'll give you one. When White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who wears a Christian cross, looks into the camera and says, quote, "No administration has ever been as transparent in revealing facts about the Epstein files than the current administration." Everybody knows she's lying. Everybody. Now, I don't know whether she knows that or not. And I don't know what the meaning of that cross is. But it's an example of what I have in mind about the desecration of the holy. So Jesus teaches, I'm a child of God. So are you. And so are you. And so are you. And when he says that, he's talking about our origin. But he's also talking about our purpose. If you're a child of God, live like it. Our purpose is, if we are on the wayless way, is to become custodians of consciousness. One of the reasons I've begun referring to myself as a trans-religious spiritual teacher is because even the best of religions are failing to take this seriously. This is the reason, and I'm quoting Lenny Bruce, the comedian here, that people every day are leaving church and returning to God. Now here's the thing. Despite what is going on in the culture, people who are on the wayless way, if you're really on the wayless way, hold it that every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. No exceptions. Even Caroline Levitt. Okay? Now, this is something everybody's got to rediscover for themselves, or they have to be taught. And doing this is what it means to be a custodian of consciousness. Sometimes I will hear people say, well, you know, I used to have a relationship with God, but God's not very close to me anymore. Jesus taught, and this is my experience and my faith and what I want to teach. Present is presence. We're present now. The sacred reality both transcends and is profoundly intimate at the same time. So I'll tell you how Rudolf Otto put this. It's the reason I introduced him to you. Otto said that the sacred, the holy, is both fearsome and fascinating at the same time. It's complicated. So what Otto did, he used two Latin phrases. He introduced one as the mysterium tremendum, and the other one as the mysterium fascinosum. Now, for those of you who don't read Latin, it is the awesome mystery and the alluring mystery. We draw back and are pulled forward at the same time. Now, a theology professor said, now keep in mind, there were no women in the classroom, but even so, I don't think it would have mattered. When teaching this, our theology professor said, think about your first encounter with sex. It was both scary and alluring at the same time. While I was working on this talk, it occurred to me that way back there, when I first encountered Rudolf Otto, that was my first encounter, or one of my first encounters with non-duality. I didn't know it at the time because I didn't know that word at the time. The mysterium tremendum. God is ultimately beyond, not out there, but just too much. And you find this a lot in the Hebrew prophets, particularly Isaiah. You find it in great poetry. There's this awesomeness. And now many people never get beyond this understanding of God, and when that happens, they end up, and the church ends up doing what I call sin management. This awesome God is something you got to appease or make a deal with so you feel safe. That's why we hired clergy. They do this. However, there's that delightful theological word again. There's also this experience of fascination, of allurement, of seduction, of being pulled into something. And Otto says, if you don't have both, you miss the sense of the holy. So the tension of living with holding both sides, this is why you need to practice this, in contradiction, leads many people and institutions to go for certitude. And this is what Jesus refers to as the morality of the Pharisees. And if your morality does not go beyond that of the Pharisees, you ain't going to make it. That's what he teaches. So that's one of the things that you see behind the push all over the country now for getting 10 Commandments in public schools. Rigid rules. It's one reason we're writing history books. We want to control the narrative. And it's one reason all over the globe there is this pushback against the generous principles of authentic democracy. And this is what accounts for the conservative growth, national Christianism, Christian nationalism, conservatism, and both liberals can be very conservative, rigid. Now, accurate information and knowledge are essential for the functioning of a democracy. And one of the Substacks I read is that of Chris Hedges. Don't know if you know Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on what was going on in the Middle East a number of years ago. He's a journalist, he is an author, he's a historian, he is also a Presbyterian minister. And he explains what is happening, or whether what is not happening, in the information and knowledge area of our culture that is contributing to our being so divided. He describes that we are living in two Americas. One functioning in a very literate world, and one functioning in a non-reality based system. The literate side can cope with complexity and has the intellectual tools to separate illusion from truth. And the other America, which is the growing majority, let me get that back, has severed itself from any reality-based, print-based way of gaining knowledge and information. It's informed by TikTok, Facebook, and simplistic narratives about what's going on in the culture. So Hedges said that this divide is more than race, class, gender, more than rural, urban, believer, non-believer, red state, blue state. And it's not encouraging or hopeful to read him, because he describes this divide as not only being antagonistic, but unbridgeable. Now, as people of the Wayless Way, we won't agree with that. We have to hold hope for it being bridgeable. But nonetheless, here are some alarming statistics about the country in which we live. There are over 42 American adults, most of whom hold high school diplomas, who cannot read. An additional 50 million people in our population read at a 4th or 5th grade level. That means that a third of our nation's population is illiterate or barely literate. And this demographic is growing by 2 million people a year in our country. So if you want to have an intelligent, fact-based conversation with most people, if they're in this demographic, that's not going to happen. Almost half of the population of the United States never read a book after they graduate from either high school or the university. Now, I think the ramifications of this are enormous. That's because I read a lot. I occasionally recommend books. The ramifications are that we're in a culture where both the media and the politicians cater to an audience that is entrapped in shallowness and amnesia. It was several years ago at a Richard Rohr conference when I heard a sociologist say that 80% of adult Americans in the United States are arrested at late adolescent development. And he said the way you know that is by watching what's on primetime commercial television, because it's geared toward that demographic. The other way he said you would know it is by watching what goes on in Washington. He said most political conversations are the equivalent of high school cafeteria food fights. That's true. So I asked ChatGPT, I said, can you tell me who are the most famous Americans, either real or fictional, in America today? You're going to be surprised or not. Elon Musk, Taylor Swift, Oprah Winfrey, the fictional characters of Superman, Spider-Man, Mickey Mouse, and Kim Kardashian. By the way, have you heard that Elon Musk is going to be the first trillionaire? So I got curious about that. I mean, everybody in this room wants more money. And the people who do research and how much more money we want says, everybody, no matter how much money they make, says, I wish I had 10% more. If I just had 10% more, I'd be okay. So I figured this out. If I had $1 trillion and I spent $1 million a day, it would take me 2,740 years to spend all that money. Now that's our culture. So then I asked ChatGPT the same question about who were the most well-known factual or fictional people in the 19th century. The answers were Abraham Lincoln, Mark Twain, Uncle Sam, and Huckleberry Finn. So news, political debate, theater, art, books are judged not by the power of their ideas, but by their ability to entertain. And every preacher, every spiritual teacher is up against that reality when they stand in a place like this. Because people have just come from the theater, seeing Wicked or whatever is the great thing, and this is boring. By the way, just to be clear, those who embrace Christian nationalism are totally unmoored from reality. Now, one of the points where I disagree with Chris Hedges is that I personally know people who have graduate degrees, who are in business, medicine, law, who are just as unmoored from reality as people who have fourth grade educations. Many of them have a lot of money, and they use that money to control the narrative and to maintain power. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this. I think a lot of people are unaware of the kind of things that we're talking about in here. That's one reason. I think another reason is that most people don't want to do the work of having to grow up. That is one of the primary purposes that we have as humans on this planet, after we met the survival needs, is that we have to grow in every area where that is possible. And this is where a spiritual practice comes in handy. Plato said, "Ignorant people do not seek after wisdom. Herein lies the evil of their ignorance." But people who are custodians of consciousness are constantly questioning their assumptions and their intentions. So here's this guy, Jesus, who comes along and he says, these people who are functioning at this literal level, you got to do better than that. As a matter of fact, as good as they are at following the law, if you don't do better than that, you're not going to make it. Jesus said, I have come to fulfill a different kind of law. And the law that he said he came to fulfill involved these things: the ability to think for oneself, to draw independent conclusions, to express dissent without judgment, to be self-critical, to challenge authority, to understand historical facts, to separate truth from lies, to advocate for change, to acknowledge that there are other views, different ways of being that are morally and socially acceptable. And he got executed for pushing this agenda. Barbara Brown Taylor, you know of her? Some of you? She's an Episcopal priest who teaches at the university level and college level, and she used to take her students to different religious organizations on worship time so they could experience what that was like. And after visiting a mosque on such a visit, one of her students talked about her experience of the imam at that mosque. Said, he told us he doesn't wish to convert us to Islam. He just wants us to be the best people we can be, regardless of religion. This was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. I wish Christianity was this way. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is giving these teachings that we spent the last 3 times in here talking about. And they were based, I know I could call on any one of you and you would remember them. They are based on humility, justice, and peace. Those 3 things. Those are foundation. Then in the rest of the sermon, he begins to elaborate on these 3 things. And that's what we're into now in this very difficult passage. And my goal as a teacher, at least for you in this brief period of time, is to make this relevant and meaningful and stuff that we can take out of here and live. So I've come to believe that the system we're in is locked into a mindset that is resistant to meaningful change. At the same time, I believe there is no force more powerful than spiritual realization. And it's not only hopeful, but it is imperative that we engage in this kind of work. Not think about the outcome. I'm not trying to change somebody. This is about our inner work. Remember last week, let your light shine. Now the ego doesn't want to give up what it holds as true. It gets defensive. It's afraid something's going to be imposed on it or taken away from it. But those whose righteousness exceeds the Pharisees, what I'm calling custodians of consciousness, they are not dominated by those kind of fears. They don't say things like, well, you're not of my race. You're not of my ethnicity. You're not of my culture. You wear weird clothes. Why aren't you behaving like I want you to? Your sexual behavior scares me. They don't say things like that. Because what they know is that Jesus taught oneness. I and the Father are one. So are you. That's a mystery that is awesome and alluring. We are one. People will know that you belong to me by the way you love one another. We are called to be custodians of consciousness. And every time we see another person as ourselves, every time we see another person's need as important as our own, then the realm of reality that Jesus gave his life for becomes more real. Now, as we go forward in the teachings of Jesus, this is what he's going to be talking about. Over and over and over again in a multitude of ways. Because if people are going to hear this teaching, they're going to argue with him, they're going to push back, they're going to say, what did you mean by blah, blah, blah? And Jesus is going to say, well, there's a treasure hidden in the field. Or he's going to say, there was a man who had 100 sheep and one of them wandered off. Or he's going to say, there was a father who lost his son and welcomed him back. The father of the man who was just elected mayor of New York wrote this book right after 9/11. The book is called Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. And it's interesting, when he wrote this book, the guy who's currently mayor of New York was a little boy, right? Because this is right after 9/11. And in the preface of this book, his father, who is an anthropologist and a professor, wrote in the preface of this book about his son. When his son was like this, he said to him, someday you will change the world. That's being a custodian of consciousness, handed on like that. And in the book, he says about the Muslim people, about us who are not Muslim, he said, they do not know us. They do not hate us because they do not know us. So there are people in all religious traditions who are custodians of consciousness. And they're the ones who embrace those qualities that we've been talking about. Humility, justice, peace. They are the people who know there's no us and them. Because to other people is a deadly stance. And you cannot other someone and be a custodian of consciousness. Now, I'm going to give you some what I think are facts. People who live at the level of the ego live without meaning. That's not a judgment, that's a fact. Because they live on the surface. And they are at risk being ruled by a trivial world. You don't want to be in that demographic. And you don't want to move into another demographic and other people who are in that demographic. If the people in that demographic are in charge, the world collapses. Sorry. That's the way systems work. And yet, now get this, in spite of the fact that they die, they survive, the custodians of consciousness. Jesus is still here, right? Buddha's still here. Nelson Mandela's still here. Gandhi's still here. The custodians of consciousness transcend the culture. And the values live on if they have embodied humility, justice, and peace. Now, also, when people live at the trivial level, we shouldn't be shocked by their behavior. What do you expect of 8-year-olds? I've been reading a book on Sufi theology. Sufism is a wonderful expression of the sacred. And in this book by Kabir Helminski, he says, might it be possible to live in such a state that we can say, we are the enemy of no one. Those who appear to be our enemies are actually enemies of themselves, for they are creating their own suffering, imprisoned in their own illusions and negativity. Now, you might ask before you walk out of here, well, how am I to do this? How do I become a custodian of consciousness? Well, the answer is, how does a musician learn to improvise? It takes a lot of practice. And it takes a clear intention. Humility, justice, peace. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo, so watch your step, and I'll see you right here next week.